commenter on one of my recent videos mentioned that I should take a look at the Misc Reliant series of ships as being a strong contender for one of the best starter ships in Star Citizen. I have to admit, it hadn't really been on my radar before that. Of course, I've seen it around the verse in low-level bounties and during Misc's day at IAE, but you never really see anyone using one of these, at least I don't. And other than its odd-looking design and all-glass cockpit, I didn't really know anything about it. So I was intrigued as to what made it so appealing. Now I had some store credits laying around, so I decided to heck with it, and picked one up to see if I just happened to overlook a severely underrated ship. That's up next. Welcome back to Forge Core Gaming. I'm your host Phoenix, and this is the Misc Reliant. Before we get started, I'd like to take just a moment to ask you to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy Star Citizen content. I publish 3 videos a week and have recently added live streaming to my channel. For the time being, I'll be streaming every Friday night at 6 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you turn on your notifications so you don't miss it when I go live. But without further ado, let's get into it. The Misc Reliant core became flight ready and available for use in Star Citizen in August of 2016. Its 3 other variants, the Tana, the Sen, and the Mako, were introduced in subsequent updates nearly 3 years later in April of 2019. Now the Tana, Sen, and Mako were not available in the pledge store for purchase, so this video will mostly be centered around the core, but there are of course several stat overlaps between the variants. Breaking away from my usual format, we're going to begin this review by taking a quick lap around the outside of the ship, just so we can get to know the design a little bit. Right off the top, I can tell you, the aesthetics of the Reliant aren't what you would normally find on a ship in my fleet. This is likely attributed to the heavy Xi'an influence in the design language, plus the fact that the Reliant series is over 8 years old, and CIG ship designs have come a very long way since then. One thing that struck me as peculiar was the asymmetrical layout of the guns, despite the remainder of the ship being symmetrical about a single center axis. Its stock loadout gives you 4 size 2 laser repeaters, 2 of which are located on either side of the cockpit, port and starboard, and the other 2 being located on a gimbal affixed to the end of the port side wing. The starboard side wing is equipped with a tractor beam, which can actually be switched out for another turret that can hold yet another 2 size 2 guns, or a single size 3, giving you control of up to 6 size 2 guns. And honestly, when I found that out, I was pretty amazed. This is a starter ship after all, costing only $60, and if you were to swap all of those Badger repeaters out for size 2 attritions, you would be in command of 2,046 sustained DPS or 3,492 burst DPS, meaning firing constantly without waiting for recharge. And that kind of firepower puts you in the same range as ships that cost over double the price of the Reliant core. As I continued to move around, I couldn't help but notice the giant VTOL thrusters that, when your landing gear is down, are pointed straight at the ground. Now I don't have a ton of experience taking note of the effect of VTOL thrusters, I usually don't use them. But I did do a bunch of reading online, and apparently these make a huge difference when coming in for landing in atmosphere. But making our way to the rear of the ship, we reach the entrance that opens up by way of ramp and immediately find ourselves inside the cargo area. Not shown here, but I did test this with some crates I had laying around. The core can hold up to 6 SCU of cargo boxes, or you can hold some of the smaller vehicles in Star Citizen such as the Pulse or Greycat PTV. And again, for a starter ship, that's impressive. One downside I found here was that unfortunately there is no logout bed. There is, however, a logout bed on the Tana variant, which trades 4 SCU of cargo space for a little bit more convenience. Moving on, I just want to point out that these ships, being as they've aged quite a bit, have not had a gold standard pass for component access, and technically they're overdue for an update, but so are a bunch of other ships, so maybe they'll get some quality of life features in the future, but I wouldn't hold my breath. As it stands, they'll probably already need a minor rework for components before engineering gameplay is launched fully into the game. Jumping into the cockpit, I have minimal complaints here. The visibility provided by the all-glass bubble is top-notch, and the MFDs are a lot like what you would get in the Guardian. So yes, I would have preferred them being down at about elbow height and off to the sides, but I also think that would interfere with the overall flow in and out of the pilot and co-pilot seat. One item of note, if you have a co-pilot, then they do get access to the turret guns, but if you're flying solo, you get all guns slave to the pilot, which is likely the preferred configuration for a ship like this. Okay, the next big feature of the Reliant is the configuration change it can make when mid-flight. By pressing left alt plus K, you can switch its wings from a horizontal configuration to a vertical one, which improves both its ability to maneuver in atmosphere and it improves the firing arc of the wing turrets with respect to the firing arc of the main body guns and where you, the pilot, are aiming. Word of the wise, when you switch wing configuration, please do make sure you're high enough off the ground, otherwise you run into a situation like this. Also, when the wings are in the vertical configuration, you can't actually exit the cockpit, so keep that in mind if you need to get up mid-flight for whatever reason. Now let's talk purpose. The Reliant core is marketed as a light hauler, which I kinda take issue with as it only has 6 SCU of cargo space. And this is problematic because the smallest hauling contract I had available to me was 11 SCU of cargo. So in its current form and the current state of the game, it can't actually do the job that it was quote-unquote designed for. Rather, it's decently suited for bunker runs, where you want to bring maybe a small vehicle and some boxes to put your loot into. So if you're just starting out and are on a budget, this will get you access to those types of activities. Also, given that its DPS is abnormally high for a starter ship, I figured I'd take it into an offline pirate swarm and give it a go. Here's what I found. Overall, it wasn't a terrible performer when it came to combat. It was a tad bit slower than I expected, being only marginally faster than ships like a Cutlass Black, which I know is a completely different bracket of ships, but I was just drawing that comparison as a way to emphasize on how not fast the Reliant is. And being not fast compared to some of the other ships in the early stages of Pirate Swarm made it a little less than an ideal matchup, but that's not to say it was challenging to take them down. The high DPS of the Reliant did seem to have good impact in my early fights. Light and medium fighters were going down fairly quickly once I got guns on target. My only grievance here being that because of the spatial disparity between the guns on the ship, the aiming pips were actually separated by a considerable amount, despite having the same guns on all hardpoints. As a result, smaller ships were missed by up to half of my shots, even though I was technically speaking on target. Even still, the earlier stages went pretty smoothly and problems didn't really arise until ships like the Cutty Black came out. Cutties usually aren't a problem for smaller ships, particularly faster ones, as you can generally get behind them pretty easily and dodge their fire when they do have you in their sights. But the wingspan of the Reliant is 28.5 meters or 57 snapping turtles long, so that large surface area and relatively low movement speed translated to me absorbing a fair amount of hits. To the point that once my shields were down, I had a heck of a time avoiding fire long enough for them to get back up. And I don't want anyone to get confused or upset here. The core is not built for fighting, so I'm not judging it here necessarily. But combat is present in most areas of this game, so it's good to know what this ship is capable of. Now, as per usual, I did also want to take it into free flight mode to test its handling. So I did, and here's what I found. And this is a good time to point out, earlier stating that the Reliant wasn't particularly fast was not an indictment on the Reliant itself. It's still fairly fast with a top SCM speed of 220 meters per second. Which actually felt pretty fast in free flight mode, but the previous statement was more of an indictment of the maneuverability when it comes to pitch yaw and roll. Overall though, I felt like the core was a smooth flyer. There did seem to be a bit of drift to it when making turns, but you can counter that with pulling back on the throttle, counter steering, and boost strafing with relative ease. In fact, I actually enjoyed the way the core flew more than I had expected to. At low altitudes, it felt extremely stable, and because of the low profile of the body when in the horizontal configuration, I sort of got the idea that this would be a really cool ship for smuggling high-value items in or out of dangerous outposts in Pyro. Or perhaps the perfect prison break ship where you hug the ground and stay below the ridges of the mountains and hills. And this is pretty feasible as the Reliant has 28 SEUs of hydrogen fuel, which is a lot for a ship this size. So it can definitely put in some serious distance when flying around on planetary surfaces. And to be honest, that actually sounds like it could be a lot of fun and fill a super niche role for the right pilot. It might not even be a bad idea to strap some seats onto the rear cargo grid and use it as an impromptu dropship in hazardous areas of operation. Of course, you wouldn't rely on your shields or hull HP, as there really isn't a ton of that. With a bubble shield of only 3000 HP and a hull with only 15,460 HP, you would rely on, instead, being able to stick close to the ground and staying out of line of sight of enemy fire. And I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. But honestly, I'm kind of torn on this ship. I think with it being so wide, they could have made it just a few meters longer and given it a full stack of amenities, which wouldn't be unreasonable, as the Crusader Intrepid already has those and it's right around the same price. Albeit the Intrepid has far less DPS than the Reliant series, but it also has more cargo storage. And the DPS rating, well, it's a bit misleading because of how the pips line up on your target. Now, if you're flying in a small group of ships engaging with larger ships, then that wouldn't really be an issue so long as whoever's flying the Reliant isn't being targeted. But unfortunately, ships like the Avenger Titan do exist, and that ship does most things really well. So to circle back why I started doing a review on the ship in the first place, objectively I'm going to have to say no. The Reliant series is not in the conversation of being a contender for a top starter ship. Is it a good starter ship? I'd say yeah. Is it good enough to choose over an Avenger? I mean, sure, if you prefer the aesthetics and want the opportunity to have a co-pilot. But I don't really think this ship is worth bringing a co-pilot in. But I also understand that some people just don't want to pilot a ship, and that's perfectly fine. And I stand by what I always say. If this ship appeals to you because of literally any reason, then go for it. I'm of the belief that you can have fun in most ships in this game. And though the Reliant core may not be particularly good at anything, it's still kinda good at a couple. But now that you have my thoughts on the Reliant core, let me know yours. I'd love to hear from you. Also, please go ahead and hit that like button if you appreciate the video. I'll be starting my next Live Aboard series using the Mirai Guardian. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it when that video comes out. You can expect the first episode to come out this Sunday. That, I think I'll end the video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the verse.